Welcome into the Cris Collinsworth podcast, and welcome in our director of R&D here at Pro Football Focus, Mr. Eric Eager, who is in Philadelphia after giving a speech to the good people at the Wharton Business School up there. How did that go?
It's great. It was the first time I gave something like that, I guess since Sloan, but in front of a bunch of people. And I hope I still have it. I hope I still have it.
Professor Eric Eager. Do you miss it a little bit when you stand up in front of the room? You were a professor in college forever, and when you get back up there, you go, I kind of miss this.
I don't know. Football's pretty fun, Cris.
Yeah, tell me about it. Tell me about it. So obviously this is a really big year for PFF. For people who don't know, we're getting ready to come out with an app, which is I'm studying this thing, and we're talking about this crazy app every single day. And whatever it is that we release in the middle of August is going to be, as George Shahuri tells me, the worst version of this thing. But even now, it's really exciting with the news feed that we're starting to put together, with the betting odds, with the fantasy all in one place. And then we're unleashing on the soccer world this year with our B2B and our consumer business there. There are just so many really exciting things to happen. Oh, by the way, we've got another football season coming up here. And Eric, you're such a big part of everything that we do on sort of the gambling front and exactly what that means here. And we thought we would go through some of the win totals for this season, because at the end of it, that's really what's exciting about this year. You can extrapolate out from these numbers what the betting public and the smart money, if you want to call it that, is thinking about this football season. Is there anything that jumps off the screen at you as we begin this that we should be focused in on?
Yeah, I mean, for me right now, the biggest thing that jumps off the page for the season is I don't know if I can bet an over in the AFC. As far as win totals are concerned, when you look across the conference, you have the AFC West, where every single team has a win total in the market that is at 8.5 or above, meaning everybody's 500 or better in that division, which is just really difficult, to think about, okay, which one of those teams is going to run away and get 10 or, to get 12 or 13 victories. And then you look at the AFC East, and you have, three teams that had winning records last year, the Bills, the Dolphins, the Patriots. And then, people are pretty bullish on the Jets, even though, they've not been good for some time. And then, the AFC North, there's a lot of uncertainty there with what's going to happen at the quarterback position for the Browns this year. But then you have the Ravens and obviously, your Bengals, the AFC reigning champions. And then you have a Pittsburgh Steelers team that had a winning record last year by the grace of God, I think. So, not to say, also that the Colts in the AFC South are a solid side to go along with the Titans, who were the 1 seed in the conference last year. So, for me to look and say, okay, I think there's maybe one team where I'm kind of like, oh, I think this team will exceed expectations. But for the most part, I think these teams are just going to beat each other up.
All right. Let me go through at least one theory of mine for this football season. All right. I like to try things out on you before I say them on national television. In many ways, this is going to be the year of the wide receiver. We have never seen wide receivers given as much respect as we have in this current football season. So it's always about the quarterback, right? And you make a list of all the quarterback changes, and it's significant. It really is. Russell Wilson, Baker Mayfield, Matt Ryan, Carson Wentz, Trey Lance, Marcus Mariota, Drew Lock or Geno Smith, whoever ends up there, Deshaun Watson or Jacoby Brissett, whoever ends up there. That is a big number of quarterbacks on the move for this season, and that's going to grab the headline. But when you go, okay, what does Devontae Adams do with the Raiders, right? That is a big ticket item that we saw from the Raiders come out. Tyreek Hill, big ticket item, right? This is quarterback kind of money movement sort of thing that we're talking about. A.J. Brown, can those guys begin to move the needle on quarterbacks that were thought of as being second or third tier quarterbacks in Philadelphia, in Miami, in Las Vegas. Because if they do, and to some extent Hollywood Brown, and the flip side of that is, what does DeAndre Hopkins not being there for the first 6 games of the season do? So Amari Cooper, Devontae Parker going to New England. Is this if we see a major uptick out of Derek Carr and they win the division, if we see a major uptick out of the Miami Dolphins in Tua, if we see a major uptick in Philadelphia, is this some kind of proof or validation for wide receivers in the National Football League?
Well, I think it's been there, right? So since 2011, the new CBA, the NFL has carved out a window for teams that don't have the great quarterback. They don't have, if you don't have Tom Brady, you don't have Peyton Manning, you don't have Drew Brees or now, Mahomes or somebody like that. The NFL in 2011, 2010 draft, Sam Bradford was the first overall pick, and he got about $50 million guaranteed. And so they were disincentivizing the idea of being able, hey, let's bleed out a little bit for a year. Let's get a high draft pick. Let's take a quarterback and, move this thing up. Because if you did, there was a significant price tag in addition to the losing that you had to incur by taking a quarterback high. Starting with Cam Newton, that has not been the case. And, I've said this a few times, but since 2012, every single Super Bowl, save the Atlanta New England Super Bowl in 2016, has included a quarterback on a rookie deal. And if you take a look back, and this is, I think, one of the triumphs of PFF, what I'm really happy about with our PFF WAR metric, we've always said that these receivers are valuable because there's been this sort of gap in the logic of, okay, if you have a great quarterback, you can win. But there are teams without great quarterbacks who win. And the logic gap is filled and has been filled by teams with quarterbacks on rookies deals being able to build not only great receivers, but we'll talk about the receivers in a second, but great receiving cores using the money that they don't have to pay on their veteran quarterback because the rookie wage scale affords them that. So you think about, okay, where have we seen this happen? It's like, in Kansas City, they had Tyreek Hill, who was somewhat on a discount. That was kind of a weird thing, but they put $16 million APY into Sammy Watkins to be the second receiver. And while he wasn't great, he was pretty good in the playoffs for, when they won the Super Bowls. You look at, Deshaun Watson had his brilliance in Houston. That was DeAndre Hopkins supplementing him, right? And so you think of these as pairs. I think your point of reference is good. If you have a highly paid quarterback, you can't necessarily square the highly paid wide receiver, which is why you saw Green Bay ship Adams out of town, which is why you saw the Chiefs ship Tyreek Hill out of town. Why the Ravens let Hollywood Brown walk, because again, they're probably going to end up paying Lamar Jackson. Why Stephon Diggs left Minnesota, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, Stephon Diggs going to Josh Allen's team when Josh Allen's on a rookie deal and elevating him to an MVP kind of player. So what we've seen here is a look at saying, okay, the number one thing you want to have in the NFL is an elite quarterback that's your forever quarterback. The Josh Allens, the Mahomeses, eventually Burrow, Herbert, those guys. The second best thing is to have a quarterback on a rookie deal and have the cap flexibility to be able to incorporate an AJ Brown, to incorporate a Tyreek Hill. And I think that teams realize that this offseason far more explicitly than they had before.
Isn't that exactly what happened to the Cincinnati Bengals a season ago with Jamar?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, and as I look at the Bengals football team, I keep trying to go, why are they not well regarded, right? If anything, if Lyle Collins stays healthy, he's got a back issue or whatever right now. But if that offensive line was the huge weakness on that team that they very nearly overcame a season ago to win the Super Bowl, And now they're clearly better than what they were a year ago. They're still on rookie contracts with all these guys. Like, it's funny to me that they're almost dismissed as, okay, the Bengals had their 1 year run, but they're done. Like, I can't come up with that's why they're done theory, because Pittsburgh's changing quarterbacks. Cleveland's got an issue with the quarterback position. And one of the reasons that you like Tennessee and Indianapolis is they get 4 soft wins, or should. It didn't work out that way for Indy last year in Jacksonville, but they should have a great opportunity to go 4-0 against those lesser teams in their division.
Yeah, absolutely. And I the thing with the Bengals is, like, we've seen this happen so often in the history of the league where, you know, my personal opinion on the Bengals is, like, they're going to get better this year, but maybe folks are not going to see the results necessarily right away. And, what I really like about the Bengals franchise, I think some people view this as a negative, but I do like the Bengals franchise's loyalty, because what you often see with these teams is, like, a really good pop-up year. And the Bengals, they had some, lucky breaks, the Dalvin Cook fumble in week 1. I think the Chiefs mismanaged that game in week 17, so on and so forth. Like, they're probably a 10-7 team, easy schedule, and then they get in the playoffs and they get hot, and everybody's like, oh, okay, this is who the Bengals are. And, like, the history of teams like that is just that they regress the second year. So I think everybody's sort of looking at that and saying, okay, this team's going to get worse. I don't believe that. I think this team's going to get fundamentally better, but I don't know if you're going to have the same results. And, like, as somebody who goes to Bengals games, because I really do enjoy watching them play, I just look at this last 8 games for them, where you're going at Steelers, at Titans, Chiefs at home, Browns with Watson likely at home, at Bucks, at Patriots, home to Bills, and then Ravens at home. Like, the Bengals could be a very, very good team and go 500 in those games. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's more of just, like, the environment changes. But I agree with you. They're a lot better. And they're a team, and I know that they've gotten a lot of flack in recent years, but they're a team that has taken full advantage of this edge that the NFL gives them. Not only with Burrow, when Burrow was a rookie, the next highest paid starting quarterback in the NFL was making $10 million more than him. That was Teddy Bridgewater of Carolina at the time. So they obviously know that edge exists. But then they get T. Higgins in the same draft, who's, he's probably a $15 to $20 million wide receiver. And then you get Jamar Chase, who's probably a $20 to $25 million wide receiver. And they've used that surplus and said, okay, we're going to build a defense, but we're not going to build a defense the way that some of these teams are building defenses haphazardly. We're going to take, last year, I think the number was 6. They had 6 players in their secondary that had played 1,000 snaps for a different franchise before. And they just said, look, we're going to let the best 5 players in the secondary play. And it ended up being Eli Apple and Von Bell and guys who were really good for them last year as a group. They put Trey Hendrickson at the edge, and that was a pretty good defense. Like, it's weird to say this, but the Bengals have constructed their roster, given the luck they've had at quarterback and wide receiver, exactly how you want them to. So I agree that I think they'll be better. I just think that, as I said, the schedule for them lays out. Early in the season, it's not bad, but in the end of the season, it's a murderer's row for them. And I think that that's why people maybe aren't as high on them.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting thing, because you go back to the beginning of last football season. Burrow obviously gets hurt the year before. Nobody knew if he was even going to make it to opening day. He does. Nobody knew if he was going to be the same player that he was. If anything, he was better, and clearly got better, as did the defense. And that secondary you're talking about that was made up of a lot of first and second round draft picks around the league. All of a sudden, they're adding draft picks in the top of their draft to that secondary, and they're still keeping Jesse Bates. It's a really my problem is it's my hometown team and the one that I played for, and I keep going, what am I missing here? I feel like if this were the Pittsburgh Steelers or some team with a little bit more history, we'd be going, oh my God, they've got all these skill position guys on rookie contracts. After this year, they're going to have to pay Burrow, but this 1 year, they've got it all together, and they've got it all together in a pretty cheap deal. All right, let's move on here, because we'll just start in the North, because there are 2 teams there, that the Cleveland Browns and the Pittsburgh Steelers, who we saw how good the Browns football team is. We don't know what's going to happen with the quarterback position with Deshaun Watson. We don't know what's going to happen. And the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to make the quarterback change as well. So, but the Steelers are traditionally that team I just talked about, that they make the playoffs and they're going to win, have a winning record. What do you do? Because if all of a sudden the AFC North, because of the quarterback, becomes more like the AFC South with two lesser teams as they transition in quarterbacks, could the Ravens and the Bengals go 4-0 against those divisional opponents and be that 12-13 win team this year?
I think that's possible, and that to your point is probably the path for the Bengals to do, like, if they get the 1 seed, then all bets are off as far as repeating what they did last year. And so they'll need that to happen. I think Cleveland has a great roster aside from quarterback, and it doesn't look like Watson's going to be suspended the whole year. So, they could keep things afloat and win, 7 to 9 games, even in in modest outcomes with Jacoby Brissett and so on. The Steelers are the one. I mean, they had a really negative point differential last year, still somehow won 9 games. I think everybody looks at Tomlin probably rightly and says, hey, he just adds so much. But at some point, you have to think that Steelers team with a rookie quarterback, likely an offensive line that got better last year but isn't good, a defense that I think was feasting off of Cam Hayward and TJ Watt, you're not going to do much better than that. But the secondary hasn't gotten all that much better. The linebacking core is weak. So I do think the Steelers end up being the punching bag, but we've said this for a couple of years now, and they haven't really been able, they've always overcome there. But yeah, I think, that with the Ravens, you have to keep Lamar healthy. I think it's underrated. And this is something that I've asked around the league about. And I do think, Lamar getting COVID, the number of times he really did affect him. So you had the injury to his foot or the ankle, and also you had just like the symptoms of COVID-19 that I think really hampered him. If he gets back to form, the tight ends that they drafted, the one they already have in Andrews, offensive line gets better with Stanley getting back. The defense, they've really stocked up on this season. I think that the Ravens and Bengals are going to be a formidable pair in that division.
Yeah, I mean, just the injuries alone, right? When you lose both running backs before you get to opening day, and that's still a bit of an issue. I mean, J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, neither one of them are active, I don't think, right now on the roster, at least practicing. They're still going through it. And then you've got your 2 cornerbacks that were great players, and Marcus Peters and Marlon Humphrey, ACL and a pectoral tear there as well. And so to me, that team, they're 8-3, I think, when
they were the 1 seed in the AFC at one point.
And knocked off Kansas City. We did that game. Their offensive line also allowed 57 sacks. Ronnie Stanley went out early in the season for that football team. They draft a center, and no Hollywood Brown. So I guess the question is, does it make a difference if Lamar has that top flight receiver or not, because they're going to be run, play action, man-to-man coverage? Can Rashad Bateman and Mark Andrews do enough against those kinds of looks to not really change or impact this offense?
Yeah, so just to your point, the 4 top cap hits for the Ravens this year are Lamar Jackson, who missed time last year, Ronnie Stanley, who missed the whole season, Marcus Peters, who missed the whole season, and Marlon Humphrey, who, after he got hurt against Pittsburgh, the Ravens didn't win again. So, that's, carry the 2. That's $70 million of cap space that is you're not getting anything out of for a lot of the season. So, the thing with Lamar Jackson, and I've done some studies on this with the tracking data and everything, the thing with Lamar is that linebackers don't move against him. So, and it's gotten worse as in better for them.
Explain that a little bit more. You're talking about off of play action. So in other words, they don't play anything but the play action pass. They're not giving up the big play.
And they also don't flow against the run. So one of the things we've been looking at is linebacker play, the interplay between play action and flowing hard against the run. So somebody like Zach Cunningham, is extremely good at flowing to the run. Like after you adjust for all, and this is what math can do, you can adjust for all the play level variables and stuff. Zach Cunningham closes ground on the running back way better than a lot of other linebackers. But the guy bites on play action worse than anybody in the league. So there's that interplay. And obviously you want linebackers who are so discerning that they're able to flow against the run when it's a real run play and not when it's not. And what we see is that, it's a good question to ask. Why does Gus Edwards average 5 yards a carry in his career, even though he's not well thought of? J.K. Dobbins was a top 10 player in the NFL the last 3 years. Well, over the last 3 years, his yards before contact per carry is one of the best in football. Saying Gus Edwards is top 20. Lamar Jackson's first, right? So what we like, that running game, just by virtue of what it is, causes defenses to just like, they're in mud a little bit, right? And so I think that the hard part is, okay, then how do you take advantage of that in the passing game? And they certainly did with Andrews. I mean, Andrews emerged last year from a player who I thought was very much a like, oh, this offense just schemes him a bunch of layups, to a guy who's, I think, a superstar tight end. I think he had the most wins above replacement among tight ends during the regular season. I think Kelsey caught him by his playoff performances. But Andrews is a great player that there's a lot of feel, right? When linebackers aren't moving, right, you kind of have to like be a better field player. And I never thought like he and Hollywood Brown kind of had that connection. Rashad Bateman's got to have that with Lamar, because otherwise, like they just lack talent on the outside. And sometimes, and Lamar's fantastic. Again, when you average 3 yards per carry before contact on design runs and 6 yards per carry before contact on all runs as a quarterback, that's almost as good. It's not almost as good as passing, but it's a good second thing to passing. But you need sometimes just to be able to go 3-step drop on 3rd down and 5 and hit a wide receiver, in space. And like Bateman's got to be that for Lamar Jackson. If he is, I think that this team's going to be really hard to beat.
Yeah, the other one that really is of interest to me, the Pittsburgh Steelers, their over-under is 7. Is that right?
Yep.
7 wins. And it's almost impossible for me to say out of 17 games, the Pittsburgh Steelers aren't going to win at least 8. They could even have a losing record and still win that bet. But there are a lot of things going against this football team, whether it's Mitch Trubisky or Kenny Pickett. That's a major change. They're going to Najee Harris, you assume, almost all the time. I mean, they're going to wear that poor kid out by the time that he gets finished. Defensively, they're a team that every year has finished like number 1 in sacks forever and ever and ever. But that's also implying that you can get teams into passing situations to unleash your pass rush. And if you're playing from behind, you don't get into those kinds of situations as many times. And this is also a team, to your point, that's allowing 5 yards per carry against the run. So there are a lot of things that to me don't feel good about the Pittsburgh Steelers this year in a tough division. But it's not even humanly possible for me to take the Pittsburgh Steelers franchise, Mike Tomlin, the emblem on their helmet, and go, that team's going to finish with 6 wins this year.
Yeah, I mean, this is a team that in a season where the Ravens won 14 games, won 8 games with, Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges, you know what I'm saying? So, it's tough. I think Tomlin is one of those coaches, he's not a great 4th down decision maker. He's not particular. He's not a schemer, right? When he took over in Pittsburgh in 2007, Dick LeBeau was still the defensive coordinator. He was a Tampa 2 guy, and he let the guy run the 4-3, the Blitzburg kind of stuff. So he's not he's just a motivator that I really think, and I think Vrabel is that way. The coach of the year last year is on the Titans side, where you just kind of have to earmark that in for a little bit. Now, I don't know, man. I think that the talent level on this team is such that they're going to struggle. I think at the cornerback position, they lost Mike Hilton, obviously, to your Bengals. So that one, they had Cam Sutton there. Akello Witherspoon comes over from San Francisco to be their 3rd corner. Wallace is there on the outside as well. It's just not a great group, and there's not a lot of depth. And then at the linebacker position, I mean, I know Devin Bush is a top 10 pick, but he has not performed like one, especially since he got hurt. They bring Miles Jack over from Jacksonville, and it's like, I don't know if that doesn't remind me of the old Pittsburgh, linebackers that much. So I think all the fundamentals point towards Pittsburgh not being very good. But at the same time, like, there's Mike Tomlin, right? And this is one of the reasons why I don't think I can bet over on most teams in the AFC. But I think that with this one, I'm gonna refrain from losing money betting they're under, I think.
Yeah. So you get one. Take one out of the AFC North, and we'll move on here. Which one bet do you like the most in that division?
So the Bengals 22-1 is a great bet to win the Super Bowl. I think if they get in the tournament, it's just really hard for them. It's really hard for them for me to think that they're going to be an easy out. Obviously, I mean, last year they were 3-0 in the playoffs. So I just think it's going to be, if they get through that gauntlet that I said at the end of the season, I don't think that there's a more formidable side in the AFC.
I'm going to stick to my gut too. I think they go over 10 wins. There's just nothing that says to me the Bengals are going to be less than what they were last year. And I think that when you look at what they did inside that division against Baltimore and against Pittsburgh, they got beat by Cleveland twice, but the last game was a nothing game that didn't mean anything. The Bengals didn't play anybody. And both the Steelers and the Ravens, and the Browns have issues at the quarterback position. I'm going the Bengals over 10. Okay, let's go on to the AFC South, which spending a lot of time here with Jacksonville these days because I'm getting ready for the Hall of Fame game.
Yes.
Is there a case to be made with Doug Peterson coming in there that there could be some upheaval here? Tennessee Titans had the best record in the AFC a season ago. Indianapolis Colts lose to Jacksonville in the last game and cost them a playoff spot. But those are the two teams that feel like they have the easiest path with Jacksonville and with Houston in their division.
Yeah, I think that this is the Titans are always underrated, I think, for the same reason that the Steelers are, that their head coach is just like a force multiplier in ways that's hard to quantify. Like, Vrabel isn't a great fourth down decision maker, but he does good things he does good things like sort of just tactically. I mean, that team had, more injuries. They played more players on their roster than any team in NFL history last year.
There's like 90-something guys or whatever that rotated through. Vrabel actually told us the number, whatever it was.
Yeah, but they were the one seed in the AFC, and AFC that included the Bills, who they beat, and the Chiefs, who they throttled, in Nashville. So this is that's a team that, seller beware, I guess, if you're going to bet under on them or bet them not to win the division. But to me, in this marketplace, I think that there's two teams that I'm considering betting, and one is the Colts. I just have a ton of respect for not only Frank Reich, Matt Ryan, who I think I think we'll know pretty quickly in the season whether or not he's got it left in the tank. I think that there's a significant likelihood that he doesn't, but if he does, this team's going to be pretty good. They have great, George Lee, John Park, guys in the analytics department. You can tell when they play a game that they are trying to scrape away the edges and get, and win, which I think for some teams, you wonder if that's the case. So they're a team that I think are a lot like the Dallas Cowboys, where, if they win 12 games, we're all going to come back in December and look at each other and be like, oh yeah, we should have seen this coming. Like, this team's a house, why did we doubt this team? But much like the Cowboys, they're also, a couple things go wrong and this thing could go really wrong. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's kind of where I compare it. And then, so the team that might take advantage of it is Jacksonville, 7-1 to win the division. 6.5 is the only win total in the AFC I'll go over. It is Jacksonville. But I think there's a lot of different ways to bet this because, frankly, this team, nothing else matters except for two things. One, they're going to try to win this year because if you look at their salary cap next year, it's a mess, right? So they're trying to win this year. And that's actually an important thing when you're betting these markets. Are the Bears trying to win this year? I don't know, actually. I'm not saying they're not. I'm just saying I'm actually not sure. Jacksonville is very much trying to win this year. And it all depends on Trevor Lawrence. And if Trevor Lawrence ends up being the quarterback that everybody thought he could be, like this, 6.5 is not the like 6.5 is just the median, but like 7 wins is not really like a common outcome. I think there's a fat tail to this team where if Lawrence ends up winning, like playing good football with Doug Peterson and company, that team could win 9 or 10 games, and much like they did in 2017. So I think that one's the interesting one for me in this division.
If they can hit on everything, it was interesting. The Christian Kirk deal was like, what? They paid how much for Christian Kirk? And yet, if you go back and you watch Trevor Lawrence's big plays, and there weren't a lot of them. There really weren't a season ago. 12 touchdowns, 17 interceptions. He did a good job of escaping pressure on a lot of things, but generally his big plays were sort of lobs to corner routes, back shoulders down the field, contested catch kind of situations. And Christian Kirk has a lot of that in him. That's also where his big plays came. So when I was watching the tape of those guys, I was like, and he's a route runner. You want to come up and play cover zero. Now he is probably more of a slot kind of inside receiver kind of guy, but he led Arizona in receptions a season ago. And then the other guys have to hit, right? Zay Jones has to have a year. Marvin Jones in his 10th year or something like that has to have a year. Probably the guy who has to have a year more than anybody is Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram, you wrote the article about tight ends on their second contract, great athletes that become great players at the midpoint of their career sometimes. The swing vote for me on Jacksonville is, does Evan Ingram pop? Because he could. Athletically, he clearly could. And does Travis Etienne come back to looking like he did? And really, their other running back, James Robinson, can he play coming off the Achilles too?
Yeah, and they have an offensive line that is, like, I would say, a bunch of okay players, which that's okay, right, as long as they stay healthy. But yeah, Ingram's a player, like we see, like Eric Ebron, right, when he went with Andrew Luck, he gets a 10 touchdown season. You know what I mean? And when you're an athletic tight end and you're taken high, oftentimes the team is drafting you for your second team, unfortunately. And maybe that's the case with the Giants. I mean, the Giants, so much dysfunction last year that you question whether or not he was given a full shake. But in Jacksonville, you're playing for a guy like Doug Peterson, who was in Kansas City when Travis Kelce started to emerge. He was in Philadelphia with Zach Ertz, and then eventually Dallas Goedert, who's now a very fine player. So there's precedent there for him to be better. I think that the big thing for Jacksonville is you look at that receiving core and you say, okay, none of those guys are brilliant, but all of this is conditional on what Trevor Lawrence does. If Trevor Lawrence can't play, then none of it matters, right? None of it matters. But if Trevor Lawrence is who we all thought he could be, then I think in the same vein, none of it matters either. Like Zay Jones could be, when Carson Wentz emerged, Nelson Aguilar was like all of a sudden this great player, right? And Alshon Jeffrey all of a sudden was, worth the money, and so on and so forth. That's what I think the gamble Jacksonville is making is, let's get competent at a bunch of spots, head coach specifically. And if Trevor Lawrence has it, then they're going to be pretty good. If he doesn't, then you just move on. If he doesn't, then none of it matters, right? Nothing else matters if Trevor Lawrence isn't good.
It would be stunning. The other one that if I had to pick like a player out of the Colts lineup, for me, I think it would be their rookie wide receiver in Alec Pierce. It's like, can they come up? We know what they have in Jonathan Taylor. We know what they have their offensive line. We know Michael Pittman's going to make some plays. Mo Alley Cox is fine making plays. But if they come up with that second receiver and the kid out of Cincinnati, Alec Pierce, has some of that in him, has some of that deep threat stuff in him. If they can just push the defense off of Jonathan Taylor, I feel like that's a team, that really has a chance to pop this year.
Yeah, and they play, and I know the one question I have for that team is A, does Matt Ryan have anything left in the tank? Because I think you could in the second half of some of these seasons, you could certainly see him falling off. Phillip Rivers had the same characteristic, by the way, and he took them to an 11-win season in 2020. So I don't think that is insurmountable, but the defense, right? So one of the things when we look at these linebacker, metrics and stuff like Bobby Okereke and I guess Darius Leonard wants to be called something else now. I forgot what the middle name is, but Leonard, the linebacker for them, the superstar, they don't move on play action, which is crazy considering they play in a division which Houston's a smash mouth team. The Titans have probably the best running back in all of football, and they don't move. Like they were a very disciplined, very solid defense over the last 3-4 years. Not a lot of stars, but a very solid defense. And I thought Eberflus very much earned the head coaching job in Chicago by what he did there. Can they maintain that? Because I think if they get on the green defensively, Matt Ryan's going to be able to make enough plays on play action and even if he's not as good as we thought he was, he's going to be able to make enough plays to guys like Pittman, as you said, Alec Pierce, Ali Cox, guys like that. Jonathan Taylor's still in the prime of his career, and last year he averaged 9.5 yards a carry when the play was perfectly blocked, which is crazy to me, right? Like that kind of explosiveness. I think this team's going to be good as long as, again, some of the things that they've changed this offseason stay okay.
And Matt Ryan is going to hit the easy ones, right? That's what they missed with Wentz last year when they schemed up and they were running the ball great. And then they had, it just happened in so many games where you just had somebody running wide open down the sideline and Wentz just missed them. He just missed them. But, if Ngakoue plays again, if Darius Leonard's back thing makes me a little nervous. I don't know what's quite going on there. But if Stephon Gilmore comes back to anywhere close to the form that he had, but he's been out 14 games in the last 2 years. So there's a lot of things going on with this team, and it's, we say it all the time, but it's like those key guys with injuries, and do they all come together in the same year the way that they did for the Bengals team or one of those teams a season ago? And then, Tennessee, I think, is the one that's really hard to figure out. Derrick Henry missed so much time last year, tried to come back for the playoffs, didn't, just wasn't the same guy, I didn't think, coming in. And what happens with Ryan Tannehill now without his top receiving threat? Yeah,
Robert Woods is a wonderful player, I think, but, I don't know if he can carry a receiving core. If Treylon Burks isn't what they thought he was, and they really haven't done well at tight end. I think they bring Austin Hooper in, who's okay, like a, kind of a Jermaine Wiggins type, Brandon Myers type tight end, in my opinion. But yeah, it's going to be tough for them. Defensively, I think, Kevin Byard shows what great safety play can do. I think Jesse Bates does the same thing for Cincinnati. But that defense doesn't have a ton of talent either. Right. And they spent a lot of money on Bud Dupree, and he's been kind of a complimentary player. Landry, and Simmons are good, but again, they bought into Zach Cunningham, and I don't know if he is necessarily the linebacker you want, when he is a very good 2-down guy in a 3-down league. So it'll be interesting. I hate doubting Vrabel because I think that he does just get a lot out of his team, but we'll see how it ends up going.
Vrabel, Tomlin, Belichick, a lot of the guys that you talk about are very, whether they go for it on fourth down, they don't, whatever, but they're very hands-on coaches. They get their hands on players, Tomlin a lot with the secondary and a lot with the receivers, Vrabel with the defensive edge players, and he's out there practicing. Belichick in the weeds with all these guys and those coaches. And I think it's underestimated how some coaches just make their players better. They're just improved. Belichick, you see it time after time. Guys win with him or have great years with him, go somewhere else, and ultimately come back to him. And I think that's part of it.
Yeah, I think a big edge in the NFL over the next few years is going to be gained by the teams that can robustly and repeatedly develop players. We're kind of in a potato chip league right now where you draft guys, spend 4 years on your roster, and they move on. And they kind of let Jesus take the wheel on development. And I think that there's some incentive to do it that way. But I think teams that can actually develop players, make players better as they progress throughout their rookie contract and even later on, those teams I think have an edge that maybe we don't recognize.
Yeah. So you get one bet. Who are you taking out of the South? What's the bet?
I'm going to take the Jaguars 7-1 to win the division and over
really?
6.5 wins.
Very nice. Very nice. I'm going to go with what, in my opinion, the most disappointing team last year, and that's the Colts. I think that Matt Ryan gives them a different feel. He's going to, the play action, the running game is going to give him some opportunities for deep balls, just to take the pressure off of that. But I just think his ability to complete the easy ones and to run, people really underestimate the value of quarterback decision-making in the run game. Seeing opportunities in the run game, and with Jonathan Taylor, I think he's going to add that whole thing. I really think they're going to win that division this year. Let's jump over to the East. The Buffalo Bills, such an overwhelming favorite, almost unfairly in some ways. I'm like, the AFC is just so tough right now, and to make anybody an overwhelming favorite to go to and win a Super Bowl, I wouldn't bet them, just not out of any disrespect to the Buffalo Bills. I just think the parity in the AFC this year means that we're going to be surprised again like we were with the Bengals last year.
Yeah, we make them 11.5. I mean, we put them right on market. So we certainly at PFF give them the respect, but the markets are giving them respect. And I think, for young sports bettors, if you're listening to this, like, that's important, right? You're paying a premium to bet the teams like the Bills, to bet the teams like the Buccaneers, to bet teams like Green Bay, like Kansas City. You have to find different ways to bet those teams because the marketplace is giving them the respect that I think that they deserve. I mean, the thing with the Bills is, like, Von Miller, was a shift in philosophy. They did not have a top 20 paid player in the front seven for the majority of this ascension for them, since McDermott took over, along with Bean. But, I think that they view the time as now. I know that they're, I have, some friends that, work, within, the Kansas City and Buffalo organizations. And, like, I think when they lost to the Chiefs the second time last year, it was one of those, like, okay, what are we going to do here? Right. And I think that that's, when you think about motivation, that is the tough thing, right? Like, we saw it with the Ravens. They go 14-2 in 2019. They come out of the gates hot in 2020. They get shellacked by the Chiefs in week 3. And they've been basically in a malaise since. Basically, like, everything we have to prove is in the playoffs. So what are we going to do for these next 17 weeks, And I think with you saw that already in Buffalo last year too. They lost to Jacksonville. They had a bunch of games where, like the Falcons game, they were trailing at halftime at home to a bad Falcons team. They were in the meat grinder against the Jets, both games, I think, early, and then they broke away. The thing for me for Buffalo is this is the best team in football, and I think that the only thing between them and the AFC's 1 seed is boredom and some, like you said, some noisy thing like the Jets getting good. But this team, like, make no mistake, this is the best team in the league, and they've done a lot of things that you look at and I admire. So I'm looking forward to seeing this team compete this year.
I think they will be the best team in the league to start the season. I completely 100% agree with that. I don't know that they will be by the end of the year. And one of the things that I saw a season ago was the power of being in a great division and slugging your way through that division to make it to the Super Bowl. Of course, the NFC West produced the Rams and the 49ers, who played right down to the wire for who goes to the Super Bowl there. And the Bengals come out of a tough North division. So by the time that the Chiefs, Chargers, Raiders, and Broncos end up beating each other up in the West, whoever comes out of that, and it may be multiple teams that come out of the West, I think they're going to be the best team in football. I think they will be the best teams in football, more so than what comes out of the AFC East, unless the Miami Dolphins do what I think they're going to do. If the Miami Dolphins can make that offense work. And the offense being the outside zone, the play action, if Tua can take those 4 receivers really, and make it work. Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are going to be as fast as anybody puts on the field. Cedric Wilson's a really solid player for the Cowboys for a long time, and Gesicki can make plays over there. And you've improved the system. You've improved the wide receivers greatly. You've improved the offensive line greatly. If Armstead can play and Connor Williams plays up to his standards, plus now the other guys are, you pick out of the 5, 3 of them instead of all 5 of them up front. And we know they can play on the defensive side of the ball. I look at the and I like the fact that Teddy Bridgewater's sitting there as a backup quarterback as well. Anything can happen at the quarterback position. I just don't know how long it'll take Mike McDaniel to get that offense implemented, but I don't think the way it was in Green Bay, or that, it took Aaron Rodgers a year to sort of buy into it. I can't imagine Tua fighting it all, because that offense should fit him. He should be Jimmy Garoppolo 2.0 inside that offense. It should work.
Yeah, I think that the real question is how much of Shanahan's brilliance is Shanahan. So when we look at, we do this technique called, principal component analysis, but also, some, basically like data wrangling. We look, and Shanahan is like a few standard deviations more unique than any other offense in football. Meaning, like, when you if you put all the offenses in a cloud based upon their data, they stand out more than anybody ever. And so the question becomes, does that transfer to Miami? Because if it does, I think that this is going to be a successful year for Tua. Because here's a stat that I think is crazy. So as you know, Chris, we do big time throws and turnover-worthy plays. And that's kind of like the PFF version of touchdowns to interceptions, right? And Jimmy Garoppolo in the 10 to 19 area last year, like the most valuable area of football, 10 to 19. Two big-time throws, 15 turnover-worthy plays. But the San Francisco 49ers, when Garoppolo threw those passes, he had over a 107 passer rating. So somehow Shanahan's taking that nonsense and making efficient offense out of it. Conversely, Tua Tagovailoa last year, kind of the same thing. 2 big-time throws, 9 turnover-worthy plays in the 10 to 19 area, but his passer rating on those plays was just 68.6, meaning like he kind of was the same fundamentally as Jimmy G in that intermediate part of the field, but the Dolphins' offense was not able to sort of manufacture anything out of that. So, I think, Tua Tagovailoa, top 5 pick. We probably assumed prior that he's better than Jimmy G if he hits his ceiling. So if he improves, right, he improves on the 2 to 9 ratio there, and the offense can generate the value that it generated in San Francisco, this offense is going to be great, and this is going to be a contender in the AFC. Like, those are big ifs.
Yeah, and the problem is that McDaniel's...
That's the positive spin to put on the Dolphins.
Yeah, McDaniel's never been the play caller either. And if
correct. That's a big thing, by the way. And I'm not trying... There's a ton of coaches, Kevin O'Connell, McDaniel. I even think Josh McDaniels is another one where, like... Look, this is free advice. If I was advising head coaches, even like I think a lot of head coaches in the league become head coaches even when they don't call plays. So like I think the knock on Eric Bieniemy has always been he never called plays, and Brad Childress for Minnesota was that way too with Andy Reid, and so was Doug Peterson. So there have been various levels of success. If I was a new head coach, I would also not, and I had never called plays before, I would just not call plays, because you're learning 2 different skills at the same time while trying to run a billion-dollar football team. That is where I see some of the leaks in like the Dolphins, which is like this guy's trying to learn how to be a head coach and call plays for the first time. And I just have an immense amount of like respect for what that must be like and how hard it is.
Well, and plus it takes, as a play caller, and I've talked to Shanahan, both Shanahans, dad and son, about this. It takes the discipline to not watch the play that's currently happening. Like, you have to watch how the defense is reacting to the play that is currently happening, which is being called to set up something bigger than what you just called. Like, is that safety reacting? Are those linebackers flying across? Those are the things that make great play callers. And I've called plays a little bit even at the high school football level and even at the Pee-wee football level. Man, it's harder than you think. It is, because you basically have to have the next play in mind while that play's running and interpret the information that came out of that prior play and be willing to change your mind or confirm it, or, it's a lot. It is a lot. And if you've got a veteran quarterback, okay, let's turn it over to him at the line of scrimmage and let's go. They don't have either. They don't have either in Miami.
It's important to realize, and both of us have played football, obviously you at a much higher level. The football is driven by, there's a great deal of what makes football players and football coaches great, which is the belief in yourself, right? And there's like a arrogance is maybe the wrong word, but there's just like ego can take, like, you have to believe in yourself, right? And so when these guys get to the top of the ranks, they're trying to prove something to somebody, right? And like I said, like, I think Eric Bieniemy, for example, has been, everybody has used the trope that, like, oh, he hasn't called plays, right? And so how the heck can he be a great coach if he hasn't called plays? And we're just like, well, sure, but like, the last thing, if I was Eric Bieniemy, for example, and I took a head coaching job, would be to call plays, right? Because you're trying to learn how to run this football team. And and the problem is like the great ones, Reed, McVay, Shanahan, you'd even go down to like Belichick. McDermott doesn't call plays for Buffalo. I mean, funny. But the great ones can do both. But like, do you really want to compete with the great ones right away when you haven't done either?
Yeah, because you may not get another chance.
Right.
All right, give me your one bet out of the East. Who do you like? What would be your top bet there?
So I like Miami under. Like I said, I think there's too many things that can go wrong to for this team. And you look at, and I think we have to, expectation setting is so important in the betting markets. We all look at this number and it's like 8.5, 9. And everybody's like, oh, they won 9 games last year. So you don't think that they'll improve when they have Tyreek Hill and a better coach and all this stuff. And when you look at this team, they actually, if you look at points for and against, they had a negative point differential, which corresponded to like 7.6 wins if you actually just use point differential. So they have to improve just to go over this, which I think they have, but I don't know if they've done enough. And when you look at their wins in the second half of the season, you're looking at Houston, Baltimore, who was coming off of an overtime game, and then they had to play on Thursday Night Football. The Jets, the Panthers, the Giants, the Jets, the Saints with Ian Book. And then a Patriots team that like were trying, but they were already in the playoffs in week 18. So I think that we have to think of last year's Dolphins as more of like a 7-win team and then adjust from there. And which I think makes 8.5, 9.5 wins a tougher climb than people believe.
No, I hear you. Plus, you've got Mac Jones, who, without question, I thought was the best of the rookie quarterbacks that came out and the least talked about in many ways, in that division as well. I'm going to go the opposite of that. I'm going to go. I think that Miami Dolphins have put together a group of skill position players and an offensive line now that won't destroy them and still maintain what they did on the defensive side of the ball. So I'm going to take, very rarely would I go directly against you, but maybe it's because they used to be my favorite team when I was growing up. So that has something to do with it. Got the Bengals, I got the Dolphins. I'm going back to the future. Come back in 1 second, and we're going to knock out the division that really matters in my mind, and that's the AFC West. This is going to be a train killer. All right, back in the Western and Southern studios here, and we always think Western and Southern, they have a lot to do with paying all the brilliant people like Eric Eager here to figure out what the math means when it comes to football. And now we are off to the final division in the AFC, and that being the AFC West. And in my mind, this may well pick the Super Bowl champion this year. I love the teams that are going to go beat each other up here and just harden themselves And I can make a legitimate case that any one of these teams in this division will win this division. Right off the bat, you have to talk about the Kansas City Chiefs, right? I mean, they've just been too consistent, too good at coach and quarterback to not start with the Kansas City Chiefs. But they don't feel like the dominant pick to me in this division anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think they had a heart-to-heart this offseason, right? I mean, 2018, they find out they have a great quarterback, so they buy in, significantly. They go Frank Clark and Sammy Watkins, and to go with Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, and Chris Jones was a big, max deal kind of player, and they go all in. They win one Super Bowl. 2020 offseason, I think you remember, they were like $47 under the cap at one point, and so they before. Brady left the conference, right? We didn't know that Herbert and Burrow were going to be great. We didn't know Josh Allen was what he was. And so the Chiefs shoved all their chips in the middle to win the AFC. And then they did, right? And then that's left them kind of in cap difficulty over the last few years. Take a step back now, and the AFC is full of teams that are challenging them. And in the case of the Chargers and the Bengals, challenging them, and maybe the Dolphins, challenging them with quarterbacks on a rookie deal. So the Chiefs did take a step. I wouldn't necessarily say backwards this year, but they took a different step, right? They, trading Tyreek Hill and letting Tyrann Mathieu walk, and not paying Orlando Brown the top end deal. And by the way, if you want on PFF.com, $40, 40% off, by the way. One of the interns in our R&D group showed why that was a good decision, the diminishing returns to brilliance and tackle play. I thought it was really good look into why, the Chiefs were right not to pay Orlando Brown. But they take a step back and say, look, we're going to play the long game. We're going to try to become the Patriots of this decade, of this 20 years. And I think a lot of people are like, okay, well, instead of having one really good wide receiver, you're trying to spread the risk out at the wide receiver position now with Valdez Scantling, Sky Moore, and Juju Smith-Schuster. Defensively, they drafted 4 defensive backs, in April's draft to try to spread out the risk there, as opposed to concentrating it all on Tyrann Mathieu. And anytime a team takes a philosophical shift in how they're trying to win, I think that the market is right to pull back a little bit. They haven't pulled back a lot, right? They're 10-1 to win the Super Bowl, which is, I think, tied for third in the NFL, but they're not the favorite for the first time in a while.
Yeah, Mahomes is coming off some foot issues, and he even talks about that, he's having to go back and sort of retrain himself and some of the accuracy issues. And but you take Tyreek out, Travis Kelce is getting older. They've seemed to, this was a team that always seemed to win like the old Lakers. It was fast break. Let's see how fast we can make the game. We want to go up and down the field and make somebody try and match with us what's happening. And between the 2 deep and the 4 deep zones that they saw a season ago, and taking Tyreek's ability to catch and run with the ball underneath, it just doesn't feel. Now, I mean, there's good guys there. Juju's a good player. Or Cris, Valdez Scantling is a good player. McCole Hardman, Sky Moore, a rookie, but they're not Tyreek Hill. And is this just a different football team right now? And we saw what they did a season ago when teams were able to slow them down. And I can't imagine philosophically anybody's going to change their approach when they play Kansas City, at least until they prove they can do something differently. And can Mahomes and can Andy Reid win in that sort of 10-12 play drive scenario where they just have to keep hitting completions and making the run game work?
Yeah, their team was first in the NFL in points per drive last year, but they had the fewest drives in the NFL. So that's exactly what you're saying. Like, the NFL forced them to be patient. And I know you had their game against Denver, right? When they were in that middle of that stretch where I think they had 3 straight home games. They won all 3, but they scored, I think, 19 against Dallas, 13 against Green Bay, and I think 23 in the game that you had with Denver. They eventually figured it out, right? They eventually figured it out. until the Bengals game when the Bengals dropped 8 and in the first half of that game, the Chiefs got every yard in front of them the whole half, except for the final one when Tyreek got tackled at the 1 yard line to end the half. So for half a game, they got stymied. And I think, if I'm Andy Reid and I look at this and I say, okay, the best coaches tailor their scheme to their players. And Tyreek Hill is a deep threat player. He is an after the catch guy. And NFL teams made that almost impossible to do, right? If you looked at, box count above expected and things like that, anything the Chiefs used in their tool set to try to get players out of the deep halves of the field didn't work. And so Tyreek Hill, his average depth of target last year dropped by 2.5 yards. His yards after the catch dropped by 1.5 yards. He dropped 23 passes the last 2 years because he's not like it sounds really stupid to say because he's one of the best receivers in the whole league, but he's not a natural receiver, right? He's more of like a deep threat guy, kind of a body catcher kind of guy. And so when you're throwing him bullets underneath, you're going to get, like you had in your game with the Bills, you're going to have a pick six every once in a while because he clanks the ball off his hands. And so it made a lot of sense for the Chiefs to say, okay, well, we're going to have to scratch and claw just to get 1% better at doing the things we've always done because the NFL is going to be, they're destined not to let us do that anymore. Why not just change who you are and make the NFL adapt?
To me, it's one of the most intriguing teams to watch this year. They had the whole offseason to go, okay, we know how to do this, and we lose, Tyreek Hill in the process. So I literally can't wait to watch him play. I want to see what the offseason brought. The Denver Broncos with Russell Wilson, Nathaniel Hackett goes in as the offensive coordinator. You think of sort of the transition that they had to make in Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers up there. Well, Nathaniel Hackett's going to have to do the same thing with Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson is a great deep ball thrower. He has not been consistently a great sort of catch it, throw it over the middle, read it. That's not been the way he plays the game. He's a guy that wants to drop back 10 yards and move and keep plays alive. What sort of blending of those two people do you think we see out of the Denver Broncos, and how quickly does it come into play? Because they've got Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick, KJ Hamler. They have players up front, and their running backs may be as good as anybody has in the game right now. Javonte Williams is really a friggin' stud. That guy can play, and they split carries with Melvin Gordon last year to give you some idea how good they still think Gordon is.
Yeah, Gordon actually has been kind of pretty underrated. That defense too has talent. I mean, you have Patrick Surtain, you have Simmons in the back end as well. You have Randy Gregory coming over from Dallas, who's a good football player. There's a lot of opportunity here. I think that the issue that I have is like, expectations are maybe a bit high for year one. And you look at sort of like the fundamentals of, when Aaron Rodgers was struggling at the end of the McCarthy era, what was it? It was freelancing. It was, not, 1, 2, 3, bang. You need to be able to, like, when you have wide receivers like Cortland Sutton or, Jerry Jeudy, kind of like when you have wide receivers like Devontae Adams, like you need to hit your back foot and throw the ball to the open guy. And I think Rodgers at the end of his McCarthy era, 2018, 2.94 time to throw, right? So he's taken a lot of time in the pocket. He had 59 throwaways, which I still think is the PFF record. You come in, you get LaFleur in, right? You get Hackett in, right? Hackett now the head coach of the Broncos. 2019, it was 2.92 seconds to throw and 46 throwaways. Kind of the same thing. And in fact, his yards per attempt went down that year, even though they won 13 games. I think a lot of people, that was a lot of close wins, a good defense, an opportunistic defense. It wasn't until 2020 that his time to throw dropped to 2.68 seconds, threw the ball away only 38 times, 49 big-time throws. He started to really, trust the offense, right? And that was Rodgers. When you look at Russell Wilson, 2020, 3.03 seconds to throw, right? So not all that different. He was 2.8 or so last year, so it did get better. I think some of that was due to, like, he didn't trust his ability to hold the ball after he got injured, because early in the season, he was still holding it fairly voraciously. Can Wilson skip the 1 year that Rodgers had to get acclimated to this kind of system? If he can, I think the sky's the limit for the Broncos. If old habits die hard, this is going to be, especially in this division, where if any of these teams slip up, it's curtains for them, right? So that's the question I have.
Is that the win total for the Broncos is 10? Is that right?
10.
I just couldn't do that because I saw this in Green Bay. We saw a great player take a year to transition, and I think if anything, Russell Wilson is sort of less inclined to get the ball out of his hand quickly than what Aaron Rodgers was. And to me, it's like Muhammad Ali fighting without throwing a jab. As a quarterback, you have to jab, which is a throw in the flat, a quick slant, a sticks to your tight end, 5 yards away from you. Jab, make that defense come to you and then take the shot. They've got the running game to set it up. I just don't know that Russell in year one is going to go, oh yeah, let me change everything that I've ever done to make billions of dollars within my family here. And I that's the one I probably believe in the least. Would it stun me if, I really believe in the offense? I just don't know if you can expect a veteran quarterback to change that quickly and just completely buy in.
The Seattle Seahawks last year were one of the worst teams in terms of percentage of plays where no wide receivers got open. And Russell Wilson was still pretty good at finding players who weren't contested. It's sort of this weird stat that I looked at. The Broncos, on the other hand, were one of the top teams in the NFL in percentage of plays where a receiver got open. And yet the quarterbacks were less able to take advantage of it. If those two things can merge, the Broncos are going to be great. But, it remains to be seen. I think styles make bites in the NFL, and the best coaches can mold their scheme to a style. Can they do it in 1 year? I don't know.
Yeah. The Raiders, the other intriguing team here, they're the lowest of the win total teams, so 8.5, right? For them. And yet you can make a case that they've got an established quarterback in Derek Carr. They've got an established running back in Josh Jacobs. But now, I'll take Devontae Adams, Darren Waller, and Hunter Renfrow and play with anybody. That's as good a 3 wide receiver or tight end package as you come up with. So why is this team predicted to be under 500?
Well, I think everybody says that it was a 10-7 team when, if you look at last year, the Raiders last season, it wasn't really fundamentally a 10-win team. They had a negative 65-point differential. So that corresponds to more like a 7-win team. Down the stretch there, you had a win against Cleveland, I believe, on a Monday or Tuesday night where Nick Mullins was starting. You have a win against the Broncos by just 4 when Drew Lock was starting. You beat the Colts where there was COVID all over the place, Colts offensive line and things like that. And then you had the Chargers game, which, you did that game. It was the best game of the whole season. There was just the Chargers being the Chargers, you know what I mean? And so that I think is maybe where, I come back and I say, let's set expectations. The market's basically saying that this team's a win and a half better than they were last year. The question I have, and Derek Carr is a very interesting case. I don't think he's actually established as this team's quarterback. I think that he's effectively on a 1-year deal with a team option after that. So this is a big one for Carr. Carr, during the John Gruden era, just got better every single year with Gruden. And so the question I have, and obviously you had the hiccup where Gruden leaves and Bisaccia is the coach, but the sort of and Henry Ruggs leaves, so there were a lot of impediments put in front of Carr last year. But the same fundamentals, Gruden did unlock an aggressiveness and a quality of play in Derek Carr that had been lacking under the Del Rio regime. McDaniels has got to unlock that again, and if he does, I think this team could be good. But if he doesn't, the offensive line isn't particularly great. And, there are questions about Waller as far as I know that he's, been the subject of trade, rumors and things like that. But there are some things that can go wrong for this team that, to me, make it hard, and why I'm actually on their under, because I think the schedule is hard. I think they have the fourth hardest schedule in the NFL. And I think people are looking at last year as if the Raiders overcame some difficulties, when in reality, I think Gruden set them up decently. And then, obviously things went badly, but there was like a water level that I think Josh McDaniel is not necessarily trivial for him to rise up to.
Sometimes Josh McDaniels, who probably spends personally more time on protections and practices and walkthroughs than anybody I see as we go around from team to team, with more of their man blocking scheme and play action off of that, and ability to sneak tight ends across. And I think he's going to help their protection some. Chandler Jones is going to have to be the Chandler Jones of old. Because this secondary is, man, in this division, you better have some cornerbacks. And now Rock Ya-Sin, I guess, is going to be their guy that comes over there. Let's go on to the Chargers, because if there's ever a team that I think has driven people at PFF crazy, it may be the Chargers. Is this finally the year that they slug their way through this division, come out of it battle-tested, and end up with a run at the Super Bowl? I mean, there just isn't any major reason why you wouldn't believe that to be true. I mean, just starting on the Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa alone scale in this division makes this thing interesting. And then you go with J.C. Jackson getting added in the secondary. I mean, there's just Derwin James at the safety. There's just so many things that you go, forget the offense, and they've got great weapons on offense. What they've done to this defense ought to give them a chance.
Yeah, and the prior Chargers kind of would have stopped there, right? Like they feel like, if you don't dig a little deeper, they kind of feel like the Washington football teams early in the Dan Snyder era, right, where they get Deion Sanders and Bruce Smith, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, this team's a Super Bowl team, and there's just too many weak links. But you look, it's the secondary guys that I feel like make me more bullish on the Chargers than I otherwise would be. And I'm holding on to a 4-1 ticket for them to win the AFC West, even though I am a Kansas City fan. Like, I got great value there. But it's Sebastian Joseph Day. It's Bryce Callahan playing the nickel. It's Zion Johnson in the draft to play guard on an offensive line that kind of was always like one piece away, right? It's those kind of moves where I'm thinking, yeah, of course they got superstars. Mac, who knows if he'll be brilliant anymore, but he's fine. J.C. Jackson, I think there's questions as to whether he can be worth the contract in a different scheme other than the Patriots. Obvious questions as to whether Derwin James can stay healthy. The linebacking core is, probably their weakest group. But they added pieces that I think fortify things to where I think this is different than the normal. And again, famous last words, I think this is different than the normal Chargers team. Last year, their biggest problem was they wanted to run the Fangio defense. They wanted to run too high stuff. And they just, like with Linval Joseph being older and the linebackers not being great players, they could not square it. And they lost games to Houston, and they lost obviously to the Vegas Raiders in the week 18 game. I think that Brandon Staley gets it. I think that, Justin Herbert gets it. If you assume even just like modest improvement from Herbert, I mean, this team's going to be so hard to beat.
I mean, you go right down the list. Justin Herbert with 5,000 yards passing. In the first 2 years, no player has more completions, yards, passing touchdowns, or touchdowns than Justin Herbert. Austin Eckler, 20 touchdowns a season ago. 12 rushing, 8 receiving. He's just been amazing. Mike Williams, a big play guy down the field. Keenan Allen, just year after year over 100. Both those guys over 1,100 yards receiving. Rashawn Slater had a great year at the left tackle position. Corey Linsley, the former Packers guy, now a Pro Bowl center. Like, I was talking about the Bengals when we started off this program, like, what is it that I'm supposed to not like about this football team? And they're playing in that division that is going to make everybody just so battle-tested. I think if I had to pick somebody out of the AFC at the end of the year, it just might be the Chargers. And I hate doing that because I know how many people around PFF have done that over the years. I just can't come up with the why that this isn't the best team.
Well, I think that the biggest one would be like regression on the part of Herbert, right? Like if Herbert and like I think all of us that's the mistake we make, right? Like we make, when Carson Wentz is brilliant in year 2, like we all assume that it's just all up and up for every every player, and that's why the casinos in Vegas have bright lights, because not everything moves linearly, right? There are bumps in the road. Peyton Manning in 2001 had more interceptions than touchdowns, right? Like there are always these years that befuddle us, and I think Herbert was a player who did not have the most brilliant Oregon career after starting out great. So there is evidence that he's not perfect. I think most people look at him play and say, okay, this is a sustainably good quarterback, much like Burrow, and we're just factoring that in. Where I think that if you are going to have a bearish bet on either one of those teams, like that's the reason why one of those guys regresses.
Yeah, but you could say the same thing about Josh Allen, and that didn't happen. So
Right.
The guys with the physical skills. But
Josh Allen last year, though, by the way, we do have to. Josh Allen last year, passer rating went down like 15 points, completion percentage went down like 5 or 6 points, yards per attempt went down about a full yard. Like it did happen, right? It was just like that Bills team is so good, and the AFC East is sort of so winnable that we didn't see it. And and like Patrick Mahomes, his yards per attempt have gone down every single year since 2018. So that does happen. And I guess like the question I have is, is the rest of the team good enough for us not to notice? And I think in the case of Buffalo and for the most part Kansas City, that's been the case. I think for the Chargers, they're really making a bank on the fact that Herbert's going to stay the same, and then all these other players can come up and build from that.
Yeah, I think for me, the bigger aberration other than Herbert was the defense being ranked 23rd. Now you add J.C. Jackson. Now you add Khalil Mack to go along with Joey Bosa. If they finish 23rd this year, there are going to be some people fired with that Chargers team. So I probably would not bet the over on the win total for the season. But I think much like the 49ers and the Rams a year ago, you're going to see better teams come out of this division. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if whoever it is that survives those 4 teams ends up winning or at least going to the Super Bowl out of the AFC. Eric, thank you so much. Who's your bet? Let me just finish up with that. Out of that division, what are you betting?
I'm going to go Vegas under 8.5 wins. I'm not, I wrote about it on PFF.com. I'm not thrilled about it. Again, like these markets, if you're new to betting, like these markets are pretty well established at this point. You kind of have to wait for injuries and stuff now, unfortunately, to really get a big edge. But I think the Raiders under. I think among the teams that they are the weakest, and it's really hard for all 4 teams in the division to have a winning record.
Yeah, I probably would do the same with the Denver Broncos. I'm not quite ready to buy in. That would be one incredible coaching job for them to get over 10 wins in this first year. I'd probably go under on that one. That was fun. All right, you'll make the bets. I won't make any of them, but God, I wish I could. I do kind of wish that I was allowed to do some of this stuff. I think it would be really fun. So look for the PFF app coming very, very soon, and we're going to keep having some fun. Eric, thanks, bud.
Thanks for having me on, Chris.